I'm not convinced that Jefferson was a Christian. I don't think he was. But,
Right, well, right. That's what I'm saying.
But I think he figured it out intellectually. He was just like, if we're going to make this case, guys, like there has to be like a non-arbitrary anchor for the whole thing. If it depends on the will of man, then the problem is we have no case for this. We back right back up into. I mean, that's what they're saying. You know, King George is like, I'm in control, and they're saying, well, what's your basis? And he says, because I said so. And they're like, well, you're just a man. Why should I believe you? Because I said so. I'll kill you if you don't. And that was their basis for power.
You're so right, Zach. And that's why the Declaration, to me, is so powerful, because these men, and they all had different views. They were all from different backgrounds. You know, Franklin loved the Quakers, and, you know, Jefferson was a bit of a deist and, you know, he wasn't so much on the miraculous side of Jesus. So they had all these quirks of their own understanding, like we all do, and trying to figure it out. But they understood the concept that God created us, and yet he has done so much for us. The idea that the government is there to serve the people, not the other way around. And they figured that out. I mean, that's pretty amazing to figure that out.
And I think that they figured it out. You know, I'm not convinced that Jefferson was a Christian. I don't think he was. But,
well, right. That's what I'm saying.
But I think he figured it out intellectually. He was just like, if we're going to make this case, guys, like there has to be like a non-arbitrary anchor for the whole thing. If it depends on the will of man, then the problem is we have no case for this. We back right back up into. I mean, that's what they're saying. You know, King George is like, I'm in control, and they're saying, well, what's your basis? And he says, because I said so. And they're like, well, you're just a man. Why should I believe you? Because I said so. I'll kill you if you don't. And that was their basis for power. And so the American system has said, no, there's something anchored in the very nature of reality that is the basis for power. And this is why this controversy that's come up over the last several years about Christian nationalism is so important, because that's a term that, depending on what you mean by that, like I would push back on saying, you don't want a Christian nation? I mean, this nation was founded on Christian ideas. And so if you say, well, no, we got to remove all of that. And there's a lot of Christians that say this, but here's the problem. If you go back and look at the whole progression of liberty in the United States of America, starting from the founding of the country with the Declaration of Independence, moving into the abolishment of slavery, you say, what was the argument for why did America finally repent and abolish slavery? Because they realized that African American people are also made in the image of God.
That's right. And all men are created equal.
Yeah. They're all created equal. You look at the civil rights movement. You go Google Memphis sanitation workers strike and look at the signs they're holding up. It's a rhetorical question. Am I not a man? That's the sign. Am I not a man? And yes, you are. And if you're a human, then that means that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all humans, all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That same thread has moved all throughout history. Go read Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail, making the same exact argument. So if we say, well, we don't believe in Christian nationalism in any form or fashion, then what you essentially do is you erode the foundation for liberty for marginalized people. That's what you end up doing in the end. And so we got to be careful with our language, because I understand what they're saying on some level, but but on some level, we do want a Christian nation. I want a Christian nation. I want the nation to value human life. I don't want our government to believe that all of our rights come from them. You know what I'm saying? Like, why would you want that? I don't want that.
And that really is the heart of what James is talking about, James 2, because about the favoritism. That's where he's making that same argument in his day,
exactly,
which is 2,000
Well,
years
we'll get into that.
Yeah.
And I went down a rabbit hole on that one last night. But I wanted to mention these other two references where in the Declaration of Independence, at the end, the closing paragraph, they appeal to the supreme judge of the world. Well, who are they talking about?
You
talk
about the ultimate chief justice.
There's actually a 4-point sermon in here.
There is, yeah.
Talking about nature's God. We're all created by God, which is self-evident to them,
right.
these truths, and we on equal footing there, endowed by their Creator. Then you have this, there is a supreme judge of the world. And then the last one is a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, which, I mean, that's even taken a step further in that God's working. He's living and active, and we're going to rely on the providence of God. So, I mean, yes, it was an argument about we're not going to have a king who's from England running the show here, but their argument was based on these four principles about God. And I find that fascinating when you go back and look at it and look how much that makes sense. Even though Zach's right, we've got it wrong several times, but that was the catalyst to come back to that one principle.
Yeah.
Even the line where it says all men are created equal, women seem to have gotten over the fact that it didn't say men and women, which probably would have been a better way to frame it.
Yeah.
But
right.
at that time, but I don't hear them griping about it.
No.
They
Right.
get past it. But at some point, we didn't treat women right either.
It's a good point, because Thomas Jefferson, take him as an example. Thomas Jefferson had slaves. He had probably 600 plus slaves. And you say, well, he had slaves, so he clearly didn't believe this, and therefore what he said is not true. That's horrible logic. Now, what he said was true. Whether or not he lived it out is a different topic.
Yeah, they were men.
Did he fully live this out? What he wrote was true, and it is self-evident. And this is biblical, by the way. I mean, this is what the Bible talks about when it gives this idea of general revelation, like in the Romans passage where it says that the divine attributes of God have been clearly perceived by what has been made. What Paul's saying is it's evident, it's obvious. And so they're actually appealing to the natural law, which, by the way, that part of it is not a new idea. Thomas Aquinas had wrote quite a bit about this, but also Aristotle. I mean, Aristotle was not a believer in Jesus. I mean, he had no concept of the Judeo-Christian God. And yet, if you read a lot of things that he wrote about these causation arguments and things, like he's kind of appealing to the same thing. He's saying that there's these objects that are moving, and he's using mathematics. And he's like, if it's moving in logic, then it's moving because something else bumped into it and made it move. Well, what made that object move? Another object that was moving bumped into. Well, what made that object? And he's just going and through mathematics, he said, wait a second, there's got to be a object that doesn't move, that initiates all movement. There has to be an object that's non-arbitrary, that doesn't depend on anything else. He's describing the necessary being of who God is. And so in that same way, what Jefferson did and the founding fathers is they're anchoring the same kind of concept in morality, in the value of human life. They're saying that there has to be some being that when he says it's good, it's good. It can't depend on the will of man, because men come and go. Right? Kings come and they go, they die, they're born, they're dead. Like clearly we can't be the authors of what is true. That has to come from something greater than ourselves. And it's a very logical framework to build a society on. And it's why, by the way, that this system that we live in now, that's why it's been the greatest experiment in human freedom in the history of the world. Well,
and
it was predicated on God.
It seems almost ungrateful now to have the current thought that you alluded to, that you look back and it's like, well, we can't believe any of those old guys because they missed something. It's like, it reminds me of the line that Dad famously said to Bill Smith when he shared the gospel with him. He looked at Bill and he said, "It's almost like it's too good to be true." And Smith said, "Oh, it's too good for all of us, but it is true."
Yeah.
And I like that line. And Zach, you remember when we were filming Torchbearer in D.C., the scenes we filmed there at the Jefferson Memorial and Martin Luther King Memorial. And it was Dad that looked around every building we would go to, because we were filming in different locations. He would always look at Zach and he said, "Zach, look at that, look right over there." And he would point out on every building And I was shocked. I just didn't even notice it. Every monument, every building, there are scriptures everywhere.
Yeah.
In Washington, D.C., on every building, on the Supreme Court, on all of them. And Dad was the one, he said, look her over there. Look, Al. Look at that. Look at that one. Look at that one. And he noticed it. And he started pointing out Washington, D.C. is covered with the Word of God. I mean, the founders, there's no doubt. The whole idea was this is going to be a God thing. But we're going to provide the freedom for you to choose that. And again, that was brilliant because that's the idea. That's this idea of perfect law, because it sounds like you're putting people under the duress of law. But what you're saying is, no, we're setting you free because, trust me, when you do the right thing, you don't want to live this other way.
Yeah,
Exactly.
No, but I think too, and understanding it is that it's not. They weren't like these religious. When you think about these people that are zealots and they just believe it, like kind of like a hardcore fundamentalist. Doesn't matter what you say. They got their religion and they're sticking to it no matter what. That wasn't the thing here.
No,
this was a very well vetted intellectual philosophy as well. This isn't like. I think that's the thing that we want to like kind of look back on it and think, oh, there's fundamentalists. These guys were making a sophisticated, like well vetted, anchored in. We don't even have the ability in modern culture to even read. Like, how many people have actually read Treatise of Two Governments? Probably most people in America have never read that book, much less know what that book is, much less have ever heard of John Locke. But yet it was one of the most foundational books written for our time. And so I'm not saying I agree with everything in it, but I mean, like, we don't access information that way anymore. And so we operate in the soundbite culture. And so we want to have these sound bites, but there's a whole lot at stake here that we should probably consider.
I want to say this, just to lead into our next podcast, because we're out of time. But when you think about what Jesus represented with the discussions he had with the teachers of the law, up until Jesus, all these scholars, which we started talking about today, what makes you a scholar? It was all about their take on the law or the Torah. And what Jesus did, because he seemingly started breaking the law by doing work on the Sabbath and healing people on the Sabbath and making these.
That was one of their chief accusations.
So what he did, I heard this somewhere and I thought, ooh, that's good. And I have always remembered it. Jesus made himself the center of the law.
Yeah.
Instead of his take on the law, the law actually wrapped around him. And so he started saying, here's at the heart of the law. This is actually what it means.
Right.
Which is that there's the contrast. And that's why it was also combustible.
Yeah.
Because they're like, what's your take on the law? And he was basically, The Chosen famously had that line, and people said, that's not in the Bible, but The Chosen got it right. Because he was basically saying, I am the law in a human form.
Yeah.
And what was his charge? To love, which is the perfect law, that being complete. And we never gave the references, but the reason we keep bringing this up, because James 1:4, James 1:17, James 1:25, 2:8, 2:22, and 2:23, and then 3:2, all use that word teleos, or twice it's the word for fulfill, which is kind of teleos' cousin. So this is not like you say, why do you keep talking about this? It's like you want to be complete and perfect and wrap your head around why it's called the law that brings freedom. It is that fulfillment that Jesus basically offered in love as a person.
Yeah, and the fact we got it here at the same time of our, July 4th and the 250th anniversary is interesting.